Welcome, folks, and here we are at the TEDx Salon, the net third salon in our set. My name is Mike Pucciatin, and I am on the board of the organization that makes TEDx happen, and one of the curators for TEDx 2020. Today we are coming to you live from the Brickwest Brewery, and today we have this wonderful opportunity to talk to one of my local educational heroes, Mandy Manning. Mandy was, in addition to the fact that she was National Teacher of the Year in 2018, she also was a TEDx speaker in 2018 for our TED event that happened then. So we look forward to having a conversation with Mandy about her TED experience, about education, and about where we're going today. So thank you, Mandy, for being here. So we appreciate having you here. It's fun.
My pleasure.
All right. So your talk in 2018 was one of my favorite TED Talks TEDx has ever done. I loved it. And I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about your experience with TEDxSpokane in 2018. Can you tell me sort of like what that experience was like?
Well, so it wasn't my first time public speaking.
Well, Teacher of the Year.
Yeah. But it was such a totally different experience than I've had public speaking in general all the other times. Because there was so much support provided, not only in the actual talk itself, but in the development of the big idea. We talked originally about what my big idea was, and then helping to flesh that out, and really, what is that going to be? And I got lucky because you were my coach, and so you were super flexible with me, with the understanding that I was traveling all over the place at the time. And so we were able to speak on the phone when we needed to. We communicated through email, and then we met a couple of times. And really, you were so supportive in a way that I needed at that time. And I think that's the key piece of this whole process, is that it's not a box. It's not something that you just prepackaged and are like, this is going to fit everybody. It's more about liking the big idea, helping to flesh that big idea out, and recognizing that maybe is something that more people need to hear, and then tailoring the coaching to the individual. Yeah. And I so appreciated it, and I also appreciated the pressure and the timelines, because I tend to be a little bit of a procrastinator, and so you really helped me to focus and craft what I wanted to say, and then helped me to be able to do that, because we couldn't always meet face to face, but I was able to send you videos. Yep. And you gave me some great feedback, and it was a really incredible experience that not only helped me on the TED stage, but helped me as I continued on in my year as National Teacher of the Year.
Cool. As Teacher of the Year, you were giving an insane number of talks, right?
Yes.
What's different between the talks you were giving then and TEDx? Is there a difference between a TED Talk and a National Teacher of the Year talk?
Well, I always had the opportunity to have notes in my talks, my normal talks.
But not with TED.
I often would have like a podium if I wanted, or it was more of an interview situation. There was more opportunity for Q&A, not on the TED stage. Yeah. But because I had to memorize my TEDx, and I had to really think about, well, what does a memorized speech sound like conversationally, and plan for that, there was a little more pressure, and I got a little more nervous than I would normally be. But actually, it helped me prepare, because later, I had a couple speeches that I had to do that were memorized and timed. And one in particular was for, I'm blanking on the name right now, but it's this huge school technology, huge. And I was able to give that speech confidently, because I'd already had all of this experience in coaching and how you do that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Were there other differences you found in the TED experience, like the camaraderie with other speakers or things like that were different, or not really?
Well, I appreciated the opportunities that we had to meet other speakers. We didn't get to do that a lot, but the one element that was especially helpful was the run-through and the rehearsal. Yeah. And it wasn't just a rehearsal of, getting up and finding your spot. And I mean, it was doing the whole thing. And then getting to see what other people were doing and observing those other coaches coach those individuals.
That's cool.
And so it's an opportunity to not only learn from your coach, but learn from what other people are doing. And so I thought that was really great. And then some of the relationships have lasted beyond TED. And so,
really? That's great. Seriously?
So that's really cool.
Oh, that's tremendous.
Or if you meet someone just randomly and you're like, oh my gosh, we did TED together. And so, plus, I mean, 2018 was a stellar year.
That was a stellar year.
Some really excellent talks.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. So when you talked in 2018, what was your big idea? What were you trying to tell people?
I think my big idea was kind of a simple idea. That
They often are, the good ones, right?
we should be open and welcome newcomers. Because it's not only the right thing to do, but we are all newcomers at some point. And so it helps all of us to be welcoming and invite newcomers into our communities and help to support them.
How do you define newcomer?
Well, a newcomer can be any it could be walking into the brewery and not knowing anybody, right? It could be coming into a new school building as a new student. It could be, in my case, of what I did and what I do, a newcomer to our nation. So someone just coming in who is planning on living here for the rest of their lives, and how do we help them to become part of the community so that we all benefit?
Right. So it's like the idea of trying to figure out the other, right? I'm the other, and how do I work into this so that I can engage effectively?
Exactly.
Oh, that's cool. So your experience with newcomers, you told a great story about being one yourself. Can you just sort of relive that story for a moment?
I started my TED Talk with a story of me being a Peace Corps volunteer. And how I felt going into that situation as someone brand new, didn't know the language, didn't know the cultures and the culture and the customs, and then how that felt, and how my host family welcomed me and helped me navigate all of that. And because I had that support system in my host family, I was able to successfully navigate that experience as I moved away from them.
So how did you take that experience and translate it into a classroom when you were teaching at Salon?
Well, I just remembered how, I have to just preface that it's vastly different. Like my experience going into the Peace Corps is really a place of privilege, because we have this opportunity in the United States to join the Peace Corps and be completely supported as we go to a new nation to live and work. Whereas my students are coming not because they chose to, but because they were driven from their home for some usually very traumatic reason. So, but from my perspective, I had to think about, well, what was difficult for me? And how did it feel to be new and not know what I was doing? Or to walk into an environment and not have the language I needed to be able to successfully get whatever it was I wanted or needed. And then also this idea that we often in our communities take so many things for granted because they're easy for us. And so I remember that is indeed not the case when you're a newcomer in a new environment, because you don't know how to buy things at the grocery store. You don't even know necessarily how much the money is worth, or how to get your hair cut, for example. And so I think about those things and try, when I'm welcoming students into this newcomer classroom, I think, well, what's a simple process that I might take for granted myself, but I need to make sure they know how to navigate. And I think in the TED Talk I talked about the cafeteria and how do you navigate the cafeteria, because it can be very traumatic.
Exactly. It's a whole new thing for so many of those folks. So how long were you in the Peace Corps?
2 years.
2 years. So 2 years you were working in a newcomer structure, trying to figure out this
Right.
new culture that you were engaged with,
Yeah.
and trying to do whatever work the Peace Corps wanted you to do on top of that.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you made the connection that a lot of your students, while they've come with not choosing to, but have forced to, they still have that sort of piece, that
Yes.
thing that's going
Yeah.
on, right?
Yeah, and then also I learned from my host family, who just accepted me for, and helped me and loved me like I was their own.
Yeah.
And so learning that that's how you show unconditional acceptance and love and welcoming, and then I was like, that's what I need to be.
So you touched on a little bit, but what were the big lessons that the Peace Corps taught you about creating the right space for newcomer students?
Never making assumptions about
that's a
what
good one.
about what
Whoa.
they already know or want or need. Making sure that I have an asset mindset. It's not about
Talk more about that. What do you mean asset mindset?
so when a new student comes into the classroom, instead of thinking about all of the things that they're missing, thinking about all the things they're bringing with them. So the
That's
fact
interesting.
the fact that they are strong enough to have done this journey, so they obviously have resilience and tenacity, and curiosity, and recognizing that most of my students, while not being fluent in English or maybe knowing English very well, usually have more than one language. And so recognizing that they already have those foundational skills. And so I can build from that even if those skills aren't in English. So really recognizing the gifts and talents they bring with them instead of, oh my gosh, all these things that they're missing, how am I going to teach that
Well,
to
that's
them?
interesting because I feel like when I've been a newcomer, and again, from a privileged perspective, it doesn't happen to me that often, but when I've been in that newcomer experience, I've been completely focused on the 18 things on my list that I don't have.
Yeah.
And not on how any of my strengths could help. How do you shift that perspective with kids?
It's about, okay, so I have to admit that with newcomer students, they're innately optimistic and hopeful.
Are they really?
Yes.
That's so cool to hear.
Because
That's amazing.
they see, because we can never truly know what they've gone through in their past or their history, but they're here and they get to stay here, so they're beginning this new life.
Yeah.
And they're usually very excited about it. So already, they already have the buy-in, right? They know that they need to learn English because it will make it easier
Right.
to live here. And so they know that it will help their family if they learn English and all of that. So it's not so hard to tap into that resilience and tenacity.
Well, they need it at
Yes.
that point in order to do it, so that's not so hard. But at the same time, I would think as a newcomer, like, oh my God, there's another language. It's a really hard language to learn that I have to get a hold of.
So
how do you help? How do you leverage your strengths for that?
I definitely make it so it doesn't seem like it's too hard. I'm so excited to see them when they first come, and I make sure that we're starting with the building blocks of language, of just very simple language.
Yeah.
And we're just slowly growing together, and I'm helping them from the get-go to share something about them, so that they're like, oh, I'm not just getting, I can give back. And so
that piece about being in it together too must be huge for them.
Yes.
Because as a Peace Corps volunteer, you probably didn't have a we're in it together kind of feeling, right? Because you were probably alone, or I don't know.
At the beginning we were all together.
Yeah.
But then as we moved out, I was put in this little village by myself.
By yourself, a long way from everyone else.
So I was like totally alone.
Yeah.
And that was the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life.
I imagine.
And so I just think about that, and you think, well, what did I need in that moment to help to ease my fears?
Mm-hmm.
I needed someone who was going to be beside me to help me just do the simple things. Because if you can do the simple things, it makes you feel like you can do everything.
That's a great statement. That's beautiful.
Well, it's like the run on toilet paper.
Uh-huh.
It's like, my mom actually has expressed this to me before, even before all of this, coronavirus pandemic happened. She was like, all I need to feel safe and secure is a lot of toilet paper. Which, that's hilarious, right?
But at the
It's
same
such a
time,
simple thing, and obviously something shared by millions of people. Because the first thing they run out to get when they think that they're going to be stuck is toilet paper.
Right, exactly.
And so it's the simple things that are like, okay, I have this thing I need. Now that I feel secure in that and confident in that, I can try harder things.
That's so cool. That's beautiful. That's nice. You know, one of the things that I reviewed your talk just the other day, and one of the things you said in your talk was about the idea of one of the most important lessons that the newcomers have taught you is being open to new ways of being and doing.
Yes.
And it seems to me like in the midst of this COVID pandemic, being open to new ways of being and doing is one of the most important skills we could have.
Yes.
Can you talk about that, about how you were taught that by newcomers?
Well, yeah, because so as a culture here in the United States, we tend to get entrenched.
Yeah.
And this is very clear in Spokane because tradition is something that people cling to here, right? I think about the rivalries between schools or the way that well, this street has to go this way, and if we change it, everybody's like, what? Like it's very hard to get people to shift here. But with a newcomer, they're so used to not knowing what to expect in the next moment, which you can tell increases their joy because they don't have an expectation of what's going to happen next. Whatever happens is a delight.
Yeah.
I mean, unless it turns out badly.
But still.
But if I can have any hand in ensuring that whatever they experience is a delight, and then they're going to go to the next thing and the next thing. And I think it's that flexibility and that recognition that there is nothing that's guaranteed. There is absolutely nothing in life that is guaranteed.
That change is kind of inevitable.
Yes. Yeah. And so the more flexible you can be and the more accepting of ambiguity it makes you a more joyful human.
Yeah.
And you can move through life more comfortably because you're right. You don't know what's going to come next. So you might as well just be able to adapt to whatever it is.
So how do newcomers learn this or bring that with them? Because as you said, it's one of those things that I find a lot of people I run into in Spokane don't have that kind of resilience. They have huge anxiety about tiny changes that COVID is bringing them.
Right.
And how do you have that sort of ability to deal with those changes in a positive way?
Because likely, and of course this isn't the case for all of the newcomers, but for a large majority, they've been through the absolute worst.
Yeah.
And they're alive. And so it's like anything that comes after that, it's like icing on it's like the frosting.
Yeah, I get that.
And so and there's challenges. Like I don't want to downplay the challenges because coming to a new town, no matter how many people are welcoming you, is difficult because you have to start from the very bottom. You are likely going to have to do jobs that are not very fun.
Yep.
You're going to have to fight and fight and fight and fight. But it's that simple joy of knowing that you still exist.
That's a beautiful statement. That's wonderful. Wow.
And we don't generally have that here in the United States. I mean, some people have struggled, for sure, struggled. But they've not been forced to flee.
Right.
They've not been,
They have been subject to some of the traumas that you talked about.
Right.
That you newcomer kids have been through.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. You know, one of my favorite leadership theorists says that people actually aren't really resistant to change. They're resistant to loss. They're resistant to the loss that comes with change.
Right.
And when you're in a privileged position like I am, I have a lot more to lose than somebody who says, I've just lost my family, I've just lost my home country, I've just lost my language, I've lost this. There's less there. Is that part of it?
Yes, and I think it's a recognition of what's really important.
Yeah. Yeah,
because
that's really good. That's really
because
good.
a lot of times the loss we think we're going to experience because of change is only a perceived loss.
Yeah.
It's not a real loss.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's a loss of, say, property or material things.
Yeah.
Which we tend to prioritize here in the United States as stuff.
Yeah.
And when you've lost all your stuff and all you have are the clothes on your back and your family, you realize that really the only thing that matters is the family part or the friends.
The friends are right. Yeah.
And
that's
so, and I think that's, I mean, even my experience in the Peace Corps taught me that, because you, not in as profound a way, obviously, but you realize you don't need half the things we believe that we need.
Right. You can't take those with you to the Peace Corps.
Right. And as a matter of fact, the fewer things we have, actually, that the happier you can feel, because you're not carrying it all with you.
Right. That's cool. That's a great point. Nice. You know, I was thinking about your talk when I reviewed it, and I was looking particularly at sort of like the so what's of it. It's sort of the last third of your talk, and you really talk about this is what I've really learned from these experiences, and particularly dealing with them. And the biggest one, if I had to like summarize that last 4 or 5 minutes of your talk, it's empathy.
Yeah.
It's about the idea of being empathetic and how powerful that is, not just for newcomers, but for all of our relationships.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you think about empathy, or what the newcomers have taught you about empathy?
So sometimes we think of empathy as just being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's too simple of an explanation of what empathy is, because I can believe that I understand how you feel because I believe I can put myself in your shoes. But also sometimes when we think about it that way, comes a little bit of pity.
Yeah.
And so people tie empathy with pity. But true empathy doesn't come with pity. It comes with the belief that everybody has the potential to be a happy, healthy human.
Right.
And has infinite potential as just to be whatever it is.
Right.
And so it has to have that asset thought with it. Like, I'm meeting you for the first time, you're coming to me in my classroom, and instead of thinking about you as in, oh, that must have been a difficult journey.
Right.
And I can see that have experienced something really big and I'm gonna help you. Instead, it's being like, wow, you have been through an incredible journey, and I can't possibly imagine what that is, but I can see that experience has made you a truly incredible human being, and I cannot wait.
So good.
I cannot wait to learn with you, because we're going to learn from each other.
That's so good. That whole idea that that empathy isn't about, well, I'm here to fix it.
Right.
Empathy is about, I'm here to walk with you.
Yes.
And that is key. That's such a big piece. I was thinking as you were talking about some of the stories that you told about your kids, and thinking, how could I ever empathize with that? As you said, you had kids who watched their families die in front of them.
Yeah.
And I thought, how could I ever empathize with that? So when you put it in the structure of, it's about walking with somebody through their journey.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's amazing. How does the idea of responsibility dovetail with empathy? It's one thing to say, wow, I can feel for your journey. It's another to say, I have a responsibility to engage with you.
Yes.
How's that work?
It's about action. It's just about putting that empathy into action, and not in a way that like takes control or asserts what they need because it's what you believe that they need.
Yeah.
It's about like getting to know them. And not because you think that you're going to help them, but because you want to know who they are, and you understand the value of this community, and you want everybody in the community to be able to be happy, and successful in whatever terms that means.
Yeah.
And then it's your responsibility to then engage that, to not just be like, oh. But to be like,
Yeah.
I'd like to meet you.
Right.
And figure out who you are and figure out how we can work together to improve all of this.
And isn't there a two-way street with empathy too? That
Yes.
it's not just I want to meet you, but I want you to meet me.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to know as we are known, kind of an idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, very much.
That's brilliant. That's wonderful. How do you do that work, which is huge? What you're talking about is monumental and can be life-changing for some of these students. How do you do that in the context of, I'm in a high school and I have a curriculum I need to cover?
Well, that's when you become a little bit rebellious as an educator. And you take that curriculum, and instead of focusing on the curriculum, you look at who's in front of you in the classroom, and you figure out, okay, so I know that I need to teach you this, but what do you need, and how will you learn all of this? And then tailoring whatever's happening in the classroom to the needs of the students, not the needs of the curriculum.
Wow, that's so good. Yeah, that must be difficult to do though in the context of a standards-driven educational high school like this.
It can be difficult, but I think if we are brave enough, I think we can recognize that the roadmap that is provided to us is not the only way to get to the final destination. And so I might go off on some side streets, or maybe even up in the mountains, or crossing fjords, or whatever. At the end of the day, because I know my kids, because I have a relationship with my kids, because I've taken the time to know what they need and how they learn, we're going to get to the destination. We don't even need to worry about it.
Right, exactly. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's so good. You know, that dovetails a lot with the story you told near the end about Saida's first week. Was that Saida? Is that the correct pronunciation? Saida. And the first week of school, and how really the cafeteria, as you mentioned earlier, was so important to her that she couldn't learn these other things without taking care of that first.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about that story, how it happened?
Right. So she had the lunch line is so incredibly confusing for newcomers. You wouldn't think so, because we're all like, oh, but you follow a line and you go through, and all you do is look at the person in front of you. But if you don't even know what you're looking for, you can't learn from the person in front of you.
Exactly.
And so she accidentally ate a piece of pizza that had some
Can you tell me
pepperoni.
a little bit about Saida's background, just briefly?
So
Muslim,
a Muslim woman from Sudan, I believe. And so she couldn't eat pork.
Right.
It was part of her belief system in Islam.
Her religious belief system,
right. And so she'd gone through the lunch line thinking that she was picking up a piece of cheese pizza, and then ate some, and happened to see under the cheese there was a slice of pepperoni, and it destroyed
her.
No idea. No idea, and she was like,
Right.
It was like the end of the world, because she's so strong with her faith.
Right. And we have to have the empathy to understand that response.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And so in the room to allow her to have her emotions about it.
Yeah.
And then to help walk through that and talk about, okay, well, what do we need to do? And then after that, it was about, well, now I'm taking too many pieces of fruit, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, because they just keep giving me this.
Because I don't know what there's pork in any of this.
Doing this, and I don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so then it was about realizing, because that was before we had really set up a structure. And then realizing, okay, in response to this situation, now we're going to do and go through and follow it. And really the problem is, though, is that cheese pizza really shouldn't have had a piece of pepperoni.
To begin with, right.
To begin with. So we couldn't have probably prevented that. But then that makes you think larger and systemically.
But it tells you about how to respond to that kind of thing.
And also to recognize that if you say it's cheese pizza, you better make sure it's cheese pizza, because you don't know about the kids that are coming through the line.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we set up an environment that is going to be navigable, by any kid.
Yeah, that's really good. That's amazing. Near the end of your talk, you talked about the idea of transcending fears, both our own fears and our fears of newcomers. Can you talk a little bit about transcending fear?
Yeah. So I think our newcomers are such a good example for us of transcending fear.
Yeah.
Because they just keep moving forward.
Right.
No matter what happens to them, they are going to show up and they're going to be there and they're going to try it even if it's scary.
Right.
And I think that's such a good lesson for us as humans to recognize that even if something's scary, we need to try it because it could lead to something beautiful. And then also recognizing that we can allay each other's fears by simply being welcoming or simply saying hello or looking at someone who's different than us, and instead of being like, ooh, they're different, that freaks me out, being like, they're different, that's going to be interesting and new. And I will have an opportunity to have either a cool new friend or learn a new story or have a new experience, or something beautiful is going to happen in my life in the next 2 minutes because I said hello to someone who is different than me.
That's so good. So the lessons that you're just talking about, it seems like far beyond the schoolroom, far beyond the newcomer.
Yeah.
I mean, right now our nation is so polarized politically and with the pandemic and the rest of that, that fear seems to be everywhere.
Yes.
What do we do? How do we take the lessons that you got from the newcomer and apply that to our lives?
Well, here in the United States, we have fierce individualism.
Right.
Fierce individualism. And so we're constantly thinking about ourselves and how every moment impacts us as an individual.
Right.
And when you start to look beyond that, when you start to look at welcoming newcomers or how you felt as a newcomer yourself or the community in which you live, you start to think about the community as a whole as well. And it helps you to care beyond yourself. And I mean, our individualism is fierce. I mean, it's so fierce that we're often even willing to sacrifice our own family members for ourselves to maintain whatever whatever it is that I believe I need in that moment. And so when we welcome the newcomer, we're thinking about the community as a whole. And in a time like now, where we really have to be caring about other people, especially if, say I got the coronavirus, and it wasn't that bad for me.
Right.
I need to be able to recognize that that was my experience with coronavirus, but that my neighbor has an elderly, mother living there. And if I give my not so bad coronavirus to her, her body's going to react differently. And that family doesn't want to lose their mom. I don't want to lose my kids. I don't, we have to be able to think outside of ourselves. And so when we practice welcoming the newcomer, we're also practicing caring about community and neighbors. And then it becomes so much easier to put on a mask and stay home.
And suddenly you start having empathy for those around you on a more regular basis.
And you start to recognize when the systems we have in place aren't supporting our community.
That's really good.
And the anger turns from you, what are you doing to me, to wait, why isn't the system allowing me to take care of my community?
That's great. That's a really nice connection. And that brings that talk sort of forward into how do we apply this to our lives. So that talk was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what's happened since then for you and the impact it's had?
So I returned to my classroom. So I had been out of my classroom for a year and a half. And I went back to the classroom and I loved, it was the best semester I've ever had in my class.
After returning to the classroom?
It was amazing.
Because you were as teacher of the year, you weren't in your classroom, right? You couldn't be.
Yeah.
So you had to be out doing teacher of the year.
I was traveling all over the place, and I was meeting new people and experiencing new things. And, I like to meet new people and experience new things. But I was ready to come back home. And I had this incredible group of students from all over the world, and just bright and excited and anxious to learn. And we had such an adventure together all semester. I coached basketball. My team was the best team ever. Like, it was so great. But this opportunity came up in the middle of last year to become an advocate not only for my students, but for educators and students in schools all across Washington State.
Yeah.
And so I took a position with the Washington Education Association in their communications department. And I've been doing website and social media and communication work for them ever since. But I carry all of that with me.
Right.
And that lens of understanding that we're all part of, like, one of the things that I say is that we're like a quilt. Like, we're not all individual squares. Like, what are we if we're just individual squares? It's not until we're put together that we're an actual full quilt.
It's a nice metaphor. Yeah.
And so I think about that in everything that I do now in advocating for educators in schools and students in our state. I think about the whole of the community, and how do we make sure that our schools and our systems are racial equity and social justice are at the top of that. And how are we ensuring that every single community member has what they need in order to be able to navigate school and then move on to being happy, healthy humans. And so it's cool because I miss my kids. I don't want to. I can't say that enough.
I can see how the ideas of welcome and equity and transcending fear all would fit really well into what you're talking about here.
It makes me really look critically at systems.
Yeah.
And how everything is interconnected, and how we can ensure that what we're doing serves each and every student, not just a certain group.
Right. So connect that idea of serving each and every student to the newcomer experience. How does that fit?
Well, in the newcomer experience, we're all individuals going into that newcomer experience, on our own.
Right.
If you think about, even in my classroom, I served up, toward 13 cultures at one time, and like 25 kids. And each of those kids is coming to me with a different need and a different way of learning or thinking, being, and doing. And I have to take each of those kids and think, okay, we're going to all, even though we're all different and we all have different needs, I'm going to figure out how to do it so that we're all getting what we need.
That's great. That's a beautiful idea. I love that. That really dovetails well with it. The work that you're doing right now is with educators and, for students, advocating for students, advocating for educators. And right now it feels like educators need that kind of advocacy more than ever before because of COVID.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts about the interrelations between the COVID and advocating for teachers in schools and students?
Well, it's such an interesting time right now because we're so torn.
Yeah.
Like, all parents are torn on what they want to happen. All educators are torn on what they want to happen in the school building. Administrators are stuck in this place of, they want to satisfy everyone, but how do you do that?
Right.
But from an educator perspective, there is no place any educator wants to be more than right with their kids.
That's such an important point.
They want to be there because the key to any classroom, classroom that has engagement and is moving forward and everybody's doing the thing and learning the stuff, is a relationship.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, I think the fight is really about, can we actually make these kinds of relationships in a virtual environment?
Right.
And so many people are afraid they can't do that.
Right.
And that's where the struggle comes.
I mean, the relationship, I totally get that. I mean, I'm a firm believer, as you know, that the relationship is what it's all based on.
Yeah.
Nothing else happens unless you've got
Right.
that. But yet, we're hearing all sorts of arguments about oh my God, well, how do you give students grades, or how do you give students credit, or how do you get them sitting 6 feet apart, or all the rest of that, and not really talking about how do we develop the relationship. Why is that? What's happening?
I think it's because it's easy to measure things.
Yeah.
Because if we can measure it, then we can know if it's good or bad, which is totally false.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's hard to measure relationships. I mean, I know that it can be done because you can look, classroom to classroom or environment in a building to environment in a building and know where there's strong relationships and where there's not.
Oh, yeah.
But so it's easy to be like, well, how are we going to do testing? Well, let's do X, Y, and Z. Well, how are we going to do this curriculum? Well, let's do that roadmap. And it's really hard to think about more nebulous things. It's that being comfortable with uncertainty, ambiguity, and we're not. Yeah. We're used to 25 to 30 kids in a room. Desks are usually now in pods, and the teacher is here, and there's going to be this thing happening and that thing happening, and the paraeducator is here, and this is going to, and we don't know how to move those pieces if we're not right there in the room. But that's severely underestimating educators.
Right.
Because we are really committed to our kids. And we love our kids, and we want to be with our kids, but we also want to be alive for our kids, and we want our kids to be alive to come to the class. And we don't want them to have gone through the trauma of losing someone in their household because they brought COVID home. Like, we talk a lot about mental health and how detrimental this is going to be to kids' mental health if they're not in the school building every day. And I'm like, but there's, on the other side of that, there's the mental trauma of being scared of COVID. And am I going to bring it home? And
why do we have this vision that if the kids aren't inside the four walls of school every day, somehow they're not getting education?
Control. It's a control.
I mean, it's not like education only happens inside. Learning doesn't just happen inside four walls in a classroom.
Well, we already talked about change and the difficulty of change. And like someone was arguing with me just the other day about you should all be opening the schools and why aren't you? And I said, well, local control, and everybody's making decisions based on the needs of their community. And then to tell that to a kid when the school is closed and they can't letter in basketball and they can't go to prom and blah, blah. And I was like, well, that's not school though. Exactly. Like that's your idea of school because it's what you experienced in school. And if kids don't have the exact same experience you did, doesn't mean they're not going to still have a very valuable, fun experience.
Exactly. That's really good. It's a great way to think about that. And it's helpful. I think it's helpful in this time when we're trying really hard. As you say, teachers want to be in school.
Oh, God.
When I hear this, teachers looking a way to get out of being in school. No, not at all. They want to be in school, and they want to serve their kids, and they want to do the best possible job. It's just that these structures make it harder to do that.
Yes.
How do we support them?
Yes.
And so, I think that's really good. I appreciate that. So we had a question come from somebody out in Facebook land, and that question was, looking back on your talk now, in 2 years later, is there anything you would have done differently about your talk?
Oh, well, I probably would have shortened it. It was a little bit long.
Okay, so Coach, that's really funny because I remember saying that.
Yeah, it's a little long.
It's got to be shorter.
It's also because I tend to slow down when I'm under pressure.
Yeah. Well, that's actually good for a TED Talk.
I enunciate. So I'd probably shorten it. And, everything is always easier in hindsight.
Yeah.
But I mean, I understand so much more about the world now, which is funny but I think that's the idea, right? The idea is that we're always learning.
Yeah.
And so of course there are things that I would change now based on what I've experienced now. Right. Because it's not just about helping the newcomer because it's the right thing to do or we were all strangers once. it's really so much bigger.
Yeah, it is a bigger idea.
And it's not, I didn't say this in my talk then either, but it's not about kindness. It's about recognizing that we're all humans and we need each other. And that just as you need me now, I'm going to need you. And so it's that that's like that relationship of the collective. And how... And
respect for the personhood of each one who comes in front of you.
Yes, and I think I would have talked even more about that asset mindset.
Yeah.
And how when someone new walks in, we can't think about what they're missing or how uncomfortable that makes me.
Yeah.
We have to think about what they're bringing and what I gain when I reach out.
Wow. That's great. Wow. So, in hindsight, if one of our TED speakers for 2020 said, Mandy, what advice do you have for me to make this the best talk I've ever given in my life? What would you tell them?
I would say speak from your heart.
Okay, we can set you up for that one.
Well, your big idea is from you.
Yeah.
And it's usually from your personal experience. So you can't get it wrong.
Right. That's so good. Right. So speak from your heart.
Speak from your heart. Don't try to make it into something that you don't really understand. It needs to be something that you can live. Like if you were to walk out the next day, you could live whatever it was you talked about. And I think that's the most important piece.
I think that's a really good piece. I think it is. I've been coaching TED speakers now for 6 or 8 years, and one of the things that I always hear just about this time, about a month and a half out from their TED Talk, is, what if nobody likes it? What if they don't get it? What if? My response is always what you said, is that if you speak from the heart, that's what you need to do.
Exactly. And really, at the end of the day, when you're sharing your big idea, you're hoping someone will listen, but it's something that was on your heart that you needed to say.
Yeah.
And if no one ever listens to it, you got to say what you needed to say.
That's good. That's really good. I'm just trying to see here on my text feed here if there are other questions that people have. So just trying to make sure that the folks out in Facebook land get a point to get anything in here before we close. So, in your work now, where do you see it going in 3 to 5 years? You've been through this amazing experience of teaching newcomers. You've taken those lessons now into advocating for students and teachers. What happens after that?
Well, hopefully I'll still be in the same job.
Oh yeah, well good.
I like it, I enjoy it, but I'm hopeful that it leads to more writing. I want to write more things. I want to share more ideas.
And I want you to write more.
And I have not been doing that. But I think that with my current position, there's some more flexibility there, at least with my level of, there's a thing with education, with teaching. You carry your classroom and your students with you everywhere you go.
Yeah.
So if you're not in the classroom, you're still in the classroom. And I'm now in a position where, yes, I'm still thinking about the same things. Yes, I'm still advocating, but I don't have a classroom of kids that I need to carry with me.
Right.
Even though I'll take my kids everywhere and they still contact me and I still help them. It's not the same. It doesn't occupy every single ounce of my brain all the time. And so I have a little bit more room, even if it's just the tiniest bits, that maybe I can process some of those ideas and get them down on paper. So. All
right. So somebody comes to you and says, Mandy, here's a check for $500,000.
Oh.
You can take the next 2 years off and just write a book. What would that book be called, and what would it be about?
Oh my gosh, what would it be called? Okay, so personally, I love to write horror stories. So I'd probably spend some time writing some sort of a horror novel. Probably about a ghost, because I like ghost stories.
That's so awesome.
But I would also, I would really like to talk about, if it's going to be education related.
Right.
I would really like to talk about and help people to look at a whole system.
Nice.
And understand the through line from pre-K up till graduation, even beyond that.
Beyond, right.
And how whatever happens in those early years is really impactful throughout. And then not only to think about that system in terms of like discipline, but also to think about, well, what's really necessary in schools? And do we need
really for?
Right.
Yeah.
What do we need to pack it with, every single subject possible so that you leave with an inch deep of knowledge about everything that you immediately forget because it was not deep enough or engaging?
Yeah.
But what really do kids need to know and be able to do? And in my opinion and in my experience, it's how to be a learner and how to be curious and how to apply knowledge to life.
That's so great, yeah.
And so I think if given the opportunity and the time and maybe a little bit of help orally processing,
I'm here for that, by the way.
I'd write about that.
Oh, that's such a great topic.
I don't know what the topic or the title would be, though.
Well, what you talked about, what I heard you say was, what's the purpose of school? What are schools for?
Yeah,
and I know other books have entitled that in the past, but it's one of those questions, like with my master's students at Whitworth, I always leave my class with, what are schools for? And I'm stunned at how many master's level educators who may have been in the classroom 4 or 5 years have never thought about that question.
Yeah.
They never asked, why are we doing this?
Why do we do it?
Right, what is this for?
Yeah.
What am I trying to do?
And what's the end goal?
Right. And yet I try to point out to them that every single day, every interaction you have with a kid is driven by what you think it's for at that moment.
Yes.
Are you thinking about that, or are you letting somebody else make the decision?
Exactly. Exactly.
And so, yeah.
And how do schools serve communities?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not for childcare. I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
It's not for childcare.
All right. So we're getting near the end here. Is there anything else you want to tell me about your TED Talk or everything else we've done?
Well, it was just an invaluable experience that I will carry with me forever.
Thank you.
And every year I'm like, do I have a new big idea?
We'd love to have another application from you at some point. That'd be great. Well, good. Well, thank you very, very much for talking to me today. This has been an awesome conversation. It's the kind of conversation I want to have way more often, so thank you.
I hope everyone could see our facial expressions. We were very expressive with our eyes.
We worked hard on that.
And my hands.
Right, hands, talking, right. Well, again, I'm hoping that even when these cameras are down, you and I could sit down and talk some more.
Always.
It's exactly the kind of area I'm excited about. So, you guys out in Facebook land, thank you very, very much for tuning in today. Thank you again, Mandy Manning, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you. And pay attention to the Facebook site for TEDxSpokane. We'll be doing more of these salons as we lead up to what we'll be doing for TEDx 2020. So thank you very much. TEDx loves you. We're out.